Awesome. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight to our PhD prep workshop. My name is Allie Hill, and I am one of the co-presidents of the Graduate Student Communication Organization. And I just want to start by introducing our three panelists. For those of you who are here at JHU, they may be familiar to you. But for those of you who are not familiar, we'll get started. So first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Taylor Hahn, the director of the communication program here at JHU. Dr. Hahn has also served as the director of civic engagement at the Ben Franklin Transatlantic Fellows Institute and is the co-author of Finding Your Voice, a comprehensive guide to collegiate policy debate. His research focuses on argument, debate, civic engagement, and the roles and trajectories of higher education in contemporary society. Next, we have Dr. Patricia Hernandez, and she is the communication program coordinator here at JHU. And she's also our amazing advisor for the Graduate Student Communication Organization. So we're very grateful for her being here. Her current research interest is in health behavior change with the digital media lens, and her work appears in the Journal of Communication Education, Journal of Media Psychology, and the Handbook of Arab American Psychology. And finally, we welcome Dr. Kristen Willett, the Assistant Director of the MA in Communication program at JHU. Dr. Willett has also taught communication courses at the University of Maryland College Park, George Mason University, and Northern Virginia Community College. Her research interests include health communication, interpersonal communication, risk and strategic communication, as well as academic advising, retention, and student learning outcomes. I'm very happy that our guests are here to join us tonight, and we'll plan on hearing from our panelists first, who will sort of intro PhD programs and the sort of steps of applying, and then we will turn to the audience for questions. So without further ado, I will pass it to you, Dr. Hernandez.
Okay. So these will be the topics that I'm all about expectation management. So this is how we advertise what the panel was going to be about, when to apply, how to select the right program, admission requirements, and financing education. But prior to that, we thought just kind of giving our own experiences, we will cover, I'm going to go back a few slides, where each of us earned our PhD, our area of specialization, and then just kind of one big surprise about our experience. And then from there, we'll each go on to those other prompts and we'll have ample time for Q&A. So Dr. Hahn, would you mind going first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And thank you for being here tonight. As we were discussing, kind of preparing this, one of the things I mentioned is that grad school, if done right, is a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun to talk about. I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my doctoral work. And as you heard in the introduction, I specialize in argumentation. And as a consequence of that, I focus on higher ed policy, civic engagement, deliberation, and so on. And one of the big things I didn't expect in doctoral work is how narrow your work becomes over time. When I first started entering a doctoral program, I wanted to analyze the histories of controversy regarding higher education in kind of the world. And by the time I was done, I ended up writing my dissertation on what was originally one part of one small chapter. And it went and shrunk over time, and it needs to. But I was amazed how specialized you become throughout those years and how much fun that is as a project. But I'll now turn it over to Drs. Willett and Hernandez.
Dr. Willett, go ahead.
Sure. So I got my PhD at George Mason University, and I specialized mostly in health communication and the intersection between health communication and interpersonal communication. And I would say the biggest surprise for me was just how important it was to have a faculty member who will stay the whole time you're getting your PhD and is an advocate for you. I didn't necessarily have one throughout my time as a PhD. And I think something I should have done when I was researching PhD programs was to really discuss with someone on staff, a tenured faculty member at a PhD program about their research interests and how they aligned with mine. And so how we could have really merged our interests together to be a much more like symbiotic relationship, because that person really does turn into a very, very important person for you throughout the time in your PhD program.
So I did my PhD at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I cannot talk about my PhD without talking about my master's degree, because I also did my master's degree at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so some of my credits applied toward my PhD program, and it also helped me decide on if I should continue my PhD at UW-Madison or go elsewhere. So those two go hand in hand. I'm also a huge Badger fan. And my area of specialization, and I think I want to share this just to show you and kind of alluding to what Dr. Hahn said in terms of how specialized it can be. So I did my master's in health communication. And then I actually thought about applying to Hopkins and doing an MPH, because I'm very interested in more health communication, international health comm. But then I ended up going to Israel, and I decided I wanted to do intercultural communication and study more media effects. So I stayed at Madison, and I focused on media effects in communication with regards to Muslim American youth and how they perceive the media here in the United States. So I was very interested in, it's for those of you that have taken communication theory, in the with the media, in media effects in terms of media bias, and so completely different from my master's degree, but yeah, in communication. So that's the best thing about comm is how diverse and broad it is, but yet when you are picking a doctoral program, like Dr. Willett alluded to, it's finding your area of research interest and those faculty that also have similar area of research interest. So I think my biggest surprise also is kind of alluding to Dr. Willett, is you're basically on your own in the sense of it's your timeline. Like, yes, faculty will be there to encourage and support you, but you are the captain of your ship, the master of your soul, and it's up to you to stay on the timeline. They don't care when you finish or not. Like it's so you have to be. It's not like when you're a master's degree, you have your 10 credits or 10 courses, you do them. There's so much more autonomy and just being disciplined and focused and passionate about what you're pursuing.
All right, so do we want to go over some audience questions now?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions based on what we just said, or we could also go through these too. So up to y'all.
Yeah, this works great, and we can ask questions at the end if no one has any questions now.
I don't see any questions, so we can probably go on. So, and also so Allie went through the process recently of applying for a doctoral program. So that's why she's moderating this panel. So she's also a great resource as well. So when to apply? Dr. Hahn, Dr. Willett, do you have anything you want to jump in on?
Sure. So one of the things to kind of think about is applying often feels like the first step, but in fact, you're taking many, many steps before you actually start saying in those materials. One of the things that I am constantly aware of is that it's a full-time job in a lot of ways to apply to grad school. You probably have experienced this with master's programs. But when you're thinking to apply, make sure that you are ready to send in your materials, usually about a year before you would actually be starting a program. Typically speaking, in most doctoral programs, if you're applying to start in the fall of the coming year, your materials are typically due before January 1st of that year. So if you wanted to start in 2024, you have to turn in all your materials by, midnight, December 31st of, 2023, for example. But like I said, though, you should be working on those materials pretty early out. And it probably takes about 6 months of just going back and forth, gathering materials, getting the right references, going over your cover letter, and really kind of tailoring each of your submissions strategically for the program that you want to be in. And that comes with the next thing we'll talk about selecting the right program. But really, the thing to remember when applying is that it has to be particular to the program, and that takes a lot of time. And so that's something that typically people are here to help you with. And that can be the three of us. It could be anyone that's gone through this process. You might have heard of what's called the hidden curriculum in academia, which is often, unless you're already aware of all these intricacies, there's never really a very good guide out there, which is one of the reasons why I think this is a great conversation to be having. But yeah, you want to make sure that you check the materials early of when to apply, and then work in reverse. If everything's due January 1st, I need to have all my stuff going by probably, November, and be ready to submit ahead of time, which means I need to reach out to letter writers well and ahead of time, so on and so forth.
So the other thing to keep in mind is, for at least my PhD program, I know they accept 6 people a year, and that is it. So bless you, Lynn. So, you want to make sure when you're applying, and this kind of, again, gets to what Taylor's saying, the thing we'll talk about second is how to select the right program. You want to make sure that you're not only showing them why you're a good candidate for one of 6 or one of 4 or one of 5. And that's usually every single PhD program in the United States. I think the top I've ever heard of is 10 for an entire year. So you're competing, you have, high competition. And one of the best ways is to show that as you kind of before the November, before the December deadline, of starting those conversations, as I was saying before, with someone in those programs, going to conferences if you are able to and have the budget, or they're near you already. So like if we're in DC, there's sometimes conferences around here, and starting to talk with people in those programs so you can get an understanding of if you're right for the program and if you like the program. Every program is different, and you may not really like the way the program runs, and so they might be struck from your list as well. The other thing to keep in mind that's very different from, especially undergraduate, it doesn't matter where this program's located. This program is, and I guess I'm getting to the second part, but when you're applying,
which is fine. I think when to apply is like, obviously the programs have their deadline. Yeah.
You're applying for the content and the people that you're working with, the instructors, the tenure track faculty, because it's a research degree. When you leave, you need to have research under your belt. I know I published research when I left. I'm sure both Dr. Hahn and Dr. Hernandez also did. We were never first authors because we're never that lucky, or I wasn't, at least at mine, but some advisors are much nicer than mine was probably. But they will add you to it so that when you go out into the job market, you aren't alone with no research under your belt. So the other thing that you have to know is, who do you want to work with? That supersedes any place. Like, it could be located in Alaska and you hate the cold. Well, sorry, but if the person you want to work with is in Alaska, get ready and buy all the really warm stuff that you need to buy, because that's where you should go. So I would say when you're getting ready to apply, the first thing should not be, where is it located? It should be, I've read this article about this really cool thing when I was in class in my master's, and I think I want to study that. Who wrote it, and where are they? And can I go study with them? Is kind of how it should start your process. And then it leads into others. So I don't know how many schools Dr. Hernandez and Dr. Hahn applied to. I applied to literally 2 programs because I knew I wanted to study health communication, invisible illness, which is any illness that you can't see by the naked eye, specifically fibromyalgia, and how we talk about that with our friends and significant others. And that meant I needed George Mason University or University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And that was it. that's all I could do because no one else could I work with. So I knew that before I even started applying, because I knew that's the researchers I needed to go work with. So before maybe we needed to reverse these in our planning, but when you're selecting, it's really who's right for you should be the first question you ask, not who am I right for, which might feel a little bit different than in the past, or not. It depends on how you kind of came about it. And then it's, where do I get to go kind of a thing. So I would say that's kind of your first step, is finding somebody you want to work with and then starting a conversation with them, because sometimes they'll say no, that they can't work with you. And that's always the worst part. But moving forward, that's kind of where you should be, your starting point, and then getting all that together. So then when you have your letters and your letter of intent for the school, you can say, I've talked to this person. I know I want to work with them, and I have a plan for how I want to work with them during my however many years you end up being. Like Dr. Hernandez says, it's very self-driven. So I took a little longer than an average to finish my PhD. And so, showing that you've already taken that step also then moves you way up the list of all the other applicants they see, because they say, okay, this person wants to work with Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith already will talk to Dr. Smith. Do you know this person? Yes, you do. Okay, that already moves you high up on the list than just saying, I like what you do here, let me in. That's not as much of a plus for you. So that would be my number one tip, is start a conversation with someone who already does research at the university, because that's the best way to start getting your foot in that door when you're going to apply, and then name drop the crap out of them in all of your application stuff. It's what we all do. It's kind of the dirty little secret of higher education, and it gets annoying, but it works when we have to do it.
Something that I would add with that is when you're thinking about selecting the right program, I think that there are groups of people that are applying who apply to a multitude of programs, and they really throw a lot out there because they know for a fact they want to go and get a doctorate, and they want to do something in particular with it. And particularly if you're in a realm of the field, or in any field that you're focused on, that you can work from a number of different places, that's great. And a number of my close friends and colleagues applied to 20, 30 programs.
Wow.
And then there's other people, and Dr. Willett, I have you beat a little bit. I only applied to a single program. And the important thing for that, I think, is a lesson that's invaluable for people looking at programs is I didn't get in for 2 years. It was my third year of applying that I got into the University of Pittsburgh. And I knew it was the only place I wanted to go. What I study and how I study it is very niche in the comm field. Pitt only accepts about 5 or 6 people every year. And it's hard at times. So if you know that you want to do a particular thing with a particular person, it makes sense to wait rather than spend years doing something that you're not sure if it's the right place. To Dr. Willett's point, I was in a cohort of 6, and I finished my degree in my 6th year, and I was the second person out of my cohort to get to finish. Everyone has since then, but the typical understanding that it takes about 4 years is doable, but it's increasingly rare. Because it's a full-time job. It really is. And so you're writing your dissertation, you're doing your comps, you're doing your coursework. And as much as you can, knowing that you might have work, you might have family obligations, it really should be a full-time job because it's so much fun if you have that ability. But finding the right program is critical, because if you're going to be living and breathing these materials, you'd better like it. A lot of people that discover that they can't finish the program. And first of all, that is fine. There's no shame, there's no problem in deciding that it isn't for you. But a lot of times that happens when someone doesn't really kind of love what they're doing. And that should be a major factor in deciding the right program. Is this exactly what I want to do? And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. I didn't know I was going to study what I ended up studying, but I knew I wanted to be with the right people who would help guide me to find the right answer for what I wanted to focus on. And so I think that kind of passion and focus is a really important factor there.
Yeah, it also
Yeah.
took me 6 years just to put that out there too. Yep. Dissertation took a long time to try and get people with fibromyalgia to talk to you. I literally got one time as an excuse, the cable guy's coming, so I can't do an interview with you. So
Yeah, to tag on to Dr. Hahn, this idea of passion, it sounds cliche, but it's not. And even this morning there was some segment on the news about, what employers are looking for in terms of hiring, because they were talking about like the best top 10 organizations to work for. And one of them was the growth mindset, which is a very common term nowadays. And then this idea of passion. And that can't be understated. And I don't believe you can teach passion. And so that's something that comes again from internally, same with, your own deadlines that you set for yourself, and obviously finances. So I don't think we can talk about how to select the right program without talking about finances, and especially in my case. And one thing I want to allude to is that both Dr. Hahn and Will and I are of similar ages. And if I'm not mistaken, we all were basically didn't have children and school was our main focus, whether we had side jobs and other things. I did like several different TAs and assistantships, which I was very fortunate. All my master's and PhD were funded because I had funding through teaching assistantships and research assistantships. So my tuition was paid for and I got a stipend on top of that. And I also I babysat on the side. I dog walked. I did other jobs as well. So I feel very blessed and fortunate that I did finish my PhD debt-free. But a huge part of selecting the program is, are there teaching assistantships? Are there research assistantships open? Because as I know I've told many people this, the best degree is the one someone else pays for. And so looking at that, so maybe you get into, 3 different programs, but which one is the right fit based on, location, the person to work with, the amount of funding that you're getting. And so it's important to take those into consideration as well.
yeah. So like for me, I was funded the whole way through, but I'm in Northern Virginia, which is a very expensive place to live. So, and where at George Mason, sadly, humanities does not get the same stipend as the sciences. So unfortunately, I did have to take student loans out to fund, my room and board basically. Now I was willing to do that because I wanted to study with the people I wanted to study with. And I knew I wasn't going to get that same education anywhere else. So I took on that knowledge. I will say, I graduated in 2015 and I remember people kind of like we would tour new PhD students, and it was something that every student asked. And so you should also do the same. If you're offered a tour, which hopefully you will be at a school, it means a school is very seriously looking at you. And one of the questions you should be asking them is, what does the assistantship look like? How much is it? What does it cover? And you should consider that if it's enough. Now, sometimes it's not enough to actually cover rent, which was happened in my case. And so then you need to have a good long look at what you think student loans will look like for you. And, and if you want to talk about the other things that you can do, I'm sure Trisha is great at talking about other ways to make it so you don't have the student loans I do, or we could talk about the PLSF, which is public service loan forgiveness, if you're curious about what I'm doing. But, it's something that you do have to decide. Some schools are very generous with their tuition help for TAs and RAs, and some schools don't have the budget, and it just depends on the school. It doesn't necessarily mean the rigor of the school is any worse. George Mason is, I think, almost an R1 school. It just means they don't have the budget. They're a relatively new school, endowment is tiny, and they just can't budget for it. So that's, if you're offered, or if you talked with anyone about the PhD program, sorry, my allergies are horrible today, that should be one of your questions. And you shouldn't feel embarrassed to ask, okay, so do you have assistantships? how many people in the PhD program get an assistantship. For my school, it was everyone. Every PhD was offered an assistantship. Not every PhD selected it, because we did have some people who were had families, husbands worked full time, and graciously enough, they didn't need it. But it was offered to every PhD student. And so that should be one of those things that you ask, and they're prepared to let you know those statistics as well, because they know it's a selling point. And they know it's going to be one of those things that you will be thinking about and comparing them to another institution to see who gives you a better deal, because it's, that is fun and it doesn't go away as fast as you wish it would. So definitely ask that when it comes to your kind of questioning the schools, and when you're selecting the right program, if you're between two and one is offering you more money, possibly look further into that one. If all other things are similar, consider those types of things. Definitely, I would say.
Yeah. And the thing to keep in mind is, in my experience in talking to colleagues, it is relatively rare to walk away from your doctoral program without some level of debt, even if you're fully funded. That's not something necessarily to shy away from, because both, you typically will get paid better upon graduation. And the reason why, and I was in the same situation as Dr. Willett, is that I was funded and I had a GA or a TA position. But the importance of really focusing on work in my doctoral program meant that I could have done another job, but I elected to take out student loans so I could really just focus in, hoping that it would pay off. It turns out it did, but it is a risk, but it's often an important one. But to Dr. Willett's point, the other thing to keep in mind is cost of living, because when you're comparing any potential offers or any potential cost of living adjustments, it is oftentimes, a number might be lower, but might actually go significantly farther, depending on where the school is located.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think if there was.
Do you want to jump to admissions? Are there any questions or any other things from us before we jump there?
Yeah, well, if we do admission, I'll put the slide of like kind of the process for admissions or applications, and then the next slide, and then, the things to consider, which we kind of alluded to those, and then I think open up for questions. So yeah, I mean, the admission process, we were talking before you all joined, we assume that if you've joined this webinar, it's because you're considering it, and so you're not coming to this blindly. But even if you are, that's what we're here for. But it's similar things to as you needed to apply for a master's degree. And actually, maybe some of you don't have a master's degree. There are programs that are a master's PhD combination. I think the three of us all went through master's first and then PhD. So similar things, your transcripts, personal statement, and this is separate from a research statement. So what do you want to research? And so maybe some of you know that you want to be a professor, and that you want, like, in order to do that at whatever institution you want, you need a PhD. And so it's one thing to want to get a PhD to teach, but that's not what these institutions are going to be looking for in a personal statement. It could be a part of it, but it's this idea of how you're going to contribute to the communication discipline. What are you interested in studying? So you have your personal statement, of which would probably be where the teaching thing would go into, but then your research statement, what are you interested in researching? And again, in that research statement, I would also include who you want to work with at that particular institution, like Dr. Willett said. So who do you want to work with? Put that in your research statement. Here's what I'm interested in. Here's who I want to work with. And this is why I'm applying to your institution. Obviously, your letters of recommendation, and then test scores. I know these are kind of changing, especially since our day. Like, I know I'm sure we all did the GRE. And then I know with COVID times, I think the GRE was like, they were given a substitution for it. So I'm actually not really sure where things are with that right now. And then obviously the language test scores. And then maybe you've never heard of the term CV. So essentially, that's the academic term for a resume. So what is your CV, your curriculum vitae? So that will be something you will include as well. And sometimes they'll also ask you for a writing sample. But again, each institution differs. Obviously, you can look at what are the, what's the process for it. But this is kind of the typical things that you see in applying. So Dr. Willett or Han, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would also, in the personal statement, while like Dr. Hernandez said, well, it's good to kind of mention that you want to go into teaching at the end of this. The other thing to keep in mind as well is if you're looking into getting a PhD, you're probably going to be asked to, expected to be a tenure track faculty member, which the three of us are currently not tenure track faculty. But usually in a PhD program, I know I was constantly asked, wait, you don't want to be tenure track? And I kept having to explain, no, I don't. But it's usually immediately expected for tenure track. And tenure track is a little different than what we do in that there's a large research component and a small teaching component, which is why if you have a large personal statement about how much you love teaching, it's not necessarily as, it's not seen as good sometimes at certain universities. Other universities don't mind it as much. And this is where learning the culture of that program is really going to be key to know. So like my program was research heavy. And like I said, I got asked multiple times a month, wait, you don't want to be a tenure track? Because everybody was expected to go into tenure track. So knowing that culture will definitely impact how much you talk up teaching. Now, teaching's wonderful. We all love it. That's why we're here. But it also, if you do want to go into any route when it comes to being a faculty member, there are other aspects of it too. So like if you're in this room right now, you're technically on a committee, but your committee is called the Graduate Student Association. So talking also about the service that you have done during, whether it's at work, whether it's here during your master's, that's another really good thing to bring up during your personal statement, because as a faculty member, you also have to do service. And so talking about the ways that you like to work with others is really also a good thing to highlight, because you'll be working, like I said, there's only 6 to 8 people in your cohort. You're going to be working very closely with others and expected to bring in some service work within the institution or within the program as well, whether it's going to conferences and standing at the booth during a graduate student, what do they call it for NCA, the graduate student fair. You might be the one now trying to convince others to come to your program. So having those kind of things that you talk about in the personal statement too, of saying, I'm also willing to, do service for your department as well, will be a good thing to kind of bring up too. So, being a faculty member isn't always being in the classroom. It's also doing a bunch of other things as well. And you probably do some of those things already. And so highlighting some of those in the personal statement and talking about how you would love to do those for this department would also be a nice thing to highlight too. And then mentioning teaching and why you want to start teaching would be a good place for that too. But you don't want to spend too much time on teaching, especially if you're going to an R1 school, because that's not a priority for them in any sense of the means, unfortunately.
Yeah, and when she says R1, it's a research
one,
a tier 1 research institution, meaning that the primary focus is research.
Yeah.
Dr. Han, you have anything else to add?
I'm trying to think strategically. One of the other things to keep in mind is that there's a good chance at least one of your letter writers is also someone who might know a bit about the program you're applying to. Mm-hmm. For example, I did my master's program at Wake Forest University, which is big for competitive debate, as is the University of Pittsburgh. And so it was a logical connection that one of the people writing my letters knew a lot of people at Pitt. Mm-hmm. And comm, I always love it. It always blows my mind. It's such a massive academic field, but it's such a small world. And so it is very likely that your letter writers may already know some of those individuals, may give you some insights, and may even help guide you toward program selection of, yeah, you're a great student, you might enjoy this place rather than this other place. And the same thing is true with that kind of institutional knowledge. And these are things that the three of us could help you with if you're curious about programs, or we connect you with people. Getting those networks and getting a sense of what is going on can really help guide your application. One of the things that is really important is to make sure that you have some level of knowledge of who is going to read those applications. It doesn't mean you kind of know exactly who's on the committee, but it is important to know, for example, if you go all in on your personal statement, I want to work with, Dr. So-and-so, but they're on sabbatical for the next 2 or 3 years, bad time. So even just kind of knowing that type of information or having some level of connection. Now you might say to yourself, well, I don't really know anyone that would have those connections. That's where I'm mentioning, whether you're in communication or another field, talking to current academics, maybe in the master's program you're in, or with people that have already gone on to doctoral programs, can kind of open that entryway. Academia is a relatively small world, and you would very likely be very easily making those connections. With the CV, I'll just put a plug in here. I work at the CV writing workshop at NCA every year. It's a lot of fun. CVs are very confusing because, as Dr. Hernandez mentioned, they're kind of like resumes, but academics are really hard to truncate things. And so the CV can be up to 35 or 40 pages for some people who have been tenured faculty for decades. They can be as small as 1 or 2 pages, and that's perfectly fine. But if you are having a confusion about how to write a CV, or if you want someone to look at yours, I really do enjoy kind of counseling people on that. I'm happy to look at yours and give some guidance. The thing to know about CVs is that there is no formula. There's no rhyme or reason. They are completely the Wild West. People organize them differently, format them differently, and that's okay. The trick is to highlight your strengths. And so if that means that you put your publications first, or you put your research, or you put your activities or whatever it is first, that is whatever makes sense for you as the applicant. I think those are my main points here. Sorry.
I was just saying, I'm a digital
scores.
hoarder.
Sorry. The last thing I have is test scores. Know what the test score requirements are. And it's important to kind of think out strategically. And I have a lesson of the road from that. So I forgot to take the GRE when I was going to my master's program. As an undergraduate, I was only focused on debate. And it was kind of the same way athletes, while I was oftentimes focused on their sport of choice, I was a debater first and foremost. And I just honestly forgot to register to take the GRE until there was 1 day left that I could take it. And if you've ever met me in person, you might notice I have a scar above my eye because the morning of the GRE, a piece of glass fell and cut my face, and I had to go take the GRE while I was bleeding profusely. Later learning that they take a photo at the GRE and they send that photo to all the schools I applied to. But had I been a little more strategic, I could have gone to the hospital instead of going to take the GRE and then getting stitches. And it's just an example of planning ahead, making sure you know when you have to take it, what scores you have to get, because it's okay to take it multiple times. But you have to make sure, a lot of times, if, for example, in comm, the math score really doesn't matter for the type of comm I was focused in, but your application might not actually get to the program if it doesn't meet the requirements or the thresholds, because it will be stopped before it goes forward.
Right.
So make sure that you're meeting all those requirements, even if they're not relevant to the field.
Yeah, and I want to touch base back on the personal statement. And actually, this goes back to the master's degree program. So I believe there were 6 people that were accepted into the master's degree program that I applied for at University of Wisconsin as life science communication. And this also ties into the test score. So I scored horribly so I was in the Midwest. I took the ACT to go to college, and my ACT score did not predict how well I did in college. I graduated at the top of my class, 4.0 in college. My high school ACT was horrible. And I just know I'm not a good test taker. So I take the GRE. I don't even remember what I got, was not great. So when I applied to University of Wisconsin in the Life Science Communication program, I reached out to the program director and I told them, I said, my ACT score did not predict how well I did in my undergrad. This is my score. I don't even think it actually met the requirements of the program. And so the personal statement is very important. And so I alluded to the test scores, but then I also talked about my journey of why I wanted to get that particular degree, studied that particular university. And it's just like, you have to be specific to that program. And like Dr. Han said, it's a full-time job applying to programs because it's just like a relationship. I don't know if any of you have been in any relationship, but you want to be wanted and vice versa. And so that's how it is with finding a program. So after I met my cohort, the one thing I found out that we all had in common, I had traveled to Uganda and Rwanda, and like we all had some sort of international experience. And for whether that was something that played a role in the acceptance or not, that was one. So your story matters. And this goes into, personal branding, storytelling, whatever it may be. The personal statement is important. And so maybe you don't have publications yet, like we've alluded to for your CV, but maybe you've worked in the field for 10, 15 years. That matters. And so it's how do you package that in your personal statement to persuade them that you are a good fit and vice versa for the program.
Yeah. The thing I was going to say, if I am a digital hoarder, I definitely still have my CV from like 2008 when I was a student. So if you want it, I'm happy to show you. Yeah, my Dropbox is a treasure trove. But I will also say, I had someone in my cohort. She had a completely different career and was completely changing careers. She was a yoga teacher, studied like health and wellness as an undergrad. I can't remember what her master's was in. So like, if you want to imagine like what her personal statement and research statement was, it was a complete, like, she was not a traditional student, a traditional statement, but what she did was she explained very well how her background has led her to these questions that she wants to ask in graduate school. And like, if you feel like, yep, I don't have much on my CV, or I don't have much proving that I have something right now, that's okay. What are the big questions that you hope to answer in research or in grad school? That is also what people want to see as well. It doesn't have to focus on your achievements. You can also really highlight the things that you want to study. And that was 100% how she got in. And that was 100% how people wanted to work with her, is because she was so excited to learn about wellness and health communication when it comes to wellness, and link her background as a yoga teacher for 30 years with health communication, that she really pulled in almost all the tenure track faculty to work with her because of this passion. So that kind of goes back to what everyone's saying, be really passionate and show that passion. If that's you in that personal statement, you feel like other things are lacking, show them that passion for what it is you want to learn, and really truly why you want to get this PhD to learn. And that really will do much more for you than truly almost anything else will. But yeah, no, my test scores were atrocious. I took the jury once and I gave up, and I prayed they would get me into the schools they did. And I went straight through my master's and PhD just so I'd never have to take them again. I'm not kidding. They were that bad. After I finished them, I went to Ben and Jerry's and had a huge ice cream because I hated them that much.
Tests do not dictate your ability to perform or succeed in graduate school.
Absolutely.
They are in many ways antithetical to the idea of graduate school.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I'll just leave this slide up, but I think with 14 minutes left, I think opening up for Q&A for everyone, and then I know Ali also has some questions as well, so the floor is open.
Feel free to pop those into chat, or
or just
unmute.
Yeah. I know there's a hand raised. Whomever raised their hand, I got a pop up, but I don't know where it went.
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
This one, I guess, specifically applies to Dr. Bullitt. because I am also pursuing a degree in health communication and like kind of shifting towards a PhD in health communication, but then I'm like, did you decide on health communication specifically when you were like a grad student, or like how did you determine like, yes, this is the thing that I'm gonna study for like 5 or even like more years?
So I actually started my master's interested in media, and it kind of evolved. And when I finished my master's, I actually didn't do a thesis in my master's. I did a project on, and it kind of did evolve to where I was curious about media and health communication at the start. So it was a slow process. And so I started merging, like, how do we talk about our health online? Now, remember, this was 2000. I graduated with my master's in 2008. So it doesn't seem like a long time ago to me, but the internet was still a baby in many ways. So forums were kind of the ways that we talked to each other back then. So I studied how people talk about invisible illness, like depression. And I think I did like sexually transmitted diseases as my final project. And that's all I said. I was curious about how we communicate about health in my interest, my personal statement. But then as I continued on my PhD, so we kind of did talk about like modality. For my PhD, it was 2 years of coursework, and then take your comps and then do your dissertation. In that 2 years of coursework, it did kind of switch over to more towards that interpersonal, how do we talk about it with each other? And I didn't necessarily care so much about the media aspect as I cared more about that interpersonal aspect. So for me, and I would say probably for Trisha as well, it sounds like it evolved. And I think that's what most places expect of you. So they don't necessarily expect when you say, I'm going to study this, that you stay with it. They expect it to kind of evolve, and it usually evolves with your advisor. So like my advisor, when I started, I did get to go to the same place for my master's and PhD as well. My advisor changed, but when it started, my advisor kind of helps you along, and they say, well, it sounds like you're interested in this. And then it kind of just kept going forward until I studied, just interpersonal relationships for my dissertation. Trisha, did you kind of experience the same thing?
Yeah. So I went to grad school. So my undergrad was actually in health and fitness management, and my advisor was like, oh my gosh, like, well, and then I also went to Uganda, Rwanda, and I was like health communication, like can save lives. So that's why I knew I wanted to study health communication, because I traveled to Uganda and Rwanda. But when I got there, I had no clue I wanted to study. And so I ended up having an assistantship with the CHESS, so Comprehensive Health Enhancement Systems. And so I was doing research with women who have breast cancer and how they cope using online support systems. I never thought of that before I went to grad school. And I mean, this was part of my assistantship. I was getting paid to do this research. And so by default, I became very passionate about it. And so I ended up doing my master's thesis with this topic. So I had no idea when I went to grad school that this is what I was going to do research on. So it does evolve, but it does help when you are applying for doctoral programs to have some sort of idea.
Keep in mind that when you apply to doctoral programs, what you say you want to study is not a contract. It's not an obligation. Yeah. It's always going to change.
And they expect that.
Yeah. And I think that the thing to gauge what you really want to study, and it takes a long time to figure it out, is what won't you stop talking about? What kind of do people's like, oh, they're talking about that thing again? That's probably what you're going to end up wanting to research and what you're going to want to study. If you don't have that spark, that passion, as I said, it gets a lot harder, and you should be doing what's fun. It's 5, 6, 7 years of your life. You should enjoy it.
Right.
Yeah. For me, I think one of the weirdest classes I took, because I kind of run out of communication classes, and so I was allowed to take classes in other programs, was actually a class in public health about inequities in healthcare. And so that also really led into this invisible illness idea of, what some people experience versus what others experience. So the classes you take are going to change, and they expect that the classes you kind of take and the conversations you have with other students, and then your faculty advisor and other faculty members as you get pulled on to research to do with them and things like that, are going to start to evolve. And you're going to say, well, this is really fascinating. I'm going to look more into this. And who can I work with that'll help me do this, and it'll start to evolve. So I would say right now, if you're just like, I'm interested in health communication, and here are some of the aspects of health communication I find interesting as your personal statement, that's completely fine, and that's 100% expected. I don't think they would expect you to say, I'm interested in health communication, and here's my dissertation topic as your personal statement. I'm sure some people have said that, and more power to them if they stuck with it for all those years. But I think all of us, I know I had no idea what I was going to write my dissertation on until I almost started writing it, quite honestly. So it's one of those things that just happens to evolve.
And to allude to that, so every program is different. My program, so 5 dissertation committee members, and 2 of them have to be outside of your department. So I studied media effects in children, so I had a psych prof as one of my committee members, and then some children, some like pediatric, something else. So it ties into my research, but 2 people have to be outside of your department to be on your committee. So the way it works briefly is you do your coursework, and then for me, I had prelims, which was, I don't know how they do it anymore, but 5 days straight, 8 hours. You are put, so if you've taken research and writing methods at Hopkins and you wrote a literature review, you basically have to do that in 1 day, 5 days in a row. So you're given a prompt that morning, and it's based on each of your advisors. So they create one question, and you have to write 8 to 10 pages. And you had to sit in a room, and by write, I mean type on a computer. This isn't that long ago. And so you do your coursework, you do your prelims, you do a dissertation proposal, and then you spend many years on your actual research, your dissertation, and then you defend. And so one of the best terms is actually funny. My license plate is still Wisconsin license plate, but it's ABD, like 1689. And every time I hear ABD, so if you don't know, it's all but dissertation. So that's a milestone. Like, you celebrate every milestone of the way when you're doing a dissertation, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. So once you're done with your coursework, then you're ABD. It's all but dissertation, and then you defend eventually. What other questions do you have?
Thank you for all those advices.
Allie, do you want to share any questions that you have prepared?
Yeah, sure. One of the questions that I had to sort of figure out as I was doing my application was, how do you demonstrate fit in a statement of purpose? We talked about how test scores are increasingly not being used as they used to be. So how do you think, beyond just, listing professors and doing things like that, you really demonstrate fit?
So I stalked people, and I actually was like, I've read this article, and I really enjoy what the person said. So I tried my best to show, like, I've done my research on your PhD. Now, for one of the schools, I ended up staying at George Mason, so that was an easy one to do. But for Urbana-Champaign, I knew who I wanted to work with there, and so I knew I'd already read articles from them. I really highlighted how I would fit and how my research aligned with what they've already published, and how we could work together really well. So it was more just like how we could serve each other. And, you have your writing sample, so that shows them your aptitude, even if there's not, like, I'm not going to lie, my GRE score was middle of the road, and lower middle of the road at that. I think it was 1060, and I don't know what it's out of anymore, but I think at that time it was out of 1600, just like the SATs back then. So not great, like not wonderful, but enough to get me into a few schools. So like, I still had to like convince, like, I'm still good. I promise I can do these things. So really it came down to me showing, like, I know what you do here. I can also help you do this. And I'm very willing to not only, do what you are wanting to do, but help in a way. So like, tenure track faculty, unless they're a full professor, are always working towards another level of tenure. So they need to publish as well. And if you can help them with that, they're very willing to also go to bat for you. And some of those people are on these admission committees. So knowing kind of who's who and showing that your research or what your interest, if you don't have that research, aligns with what they do there. Every PhD program usually only has 1 or 2 specializations. So George Mason, it was just health communication and strategic communication, which I honestly think is just under the umbrella of strategic communication. So, you're not trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole. It's the only thing that they do there. And so you're just saying, I'm also interested in this. Here's what I'm passionate about. And you already do it, kind of a thing. And that's really how you show I will fit in with what you do.
And I think the thing I would add there is you need to demonstrate you're in it for the long haul. So, I want to take classes with the following people. I want to use that to inform my focus on my prospectus that I will then use for a dissertation that I will then use for, make it clear you're thinking all the way through. Because if you're thinking from the perspective of a committee, if you're someone who enters the program and you decide halfway through it's not your thing, which again is well within your rights and there's no problem doing that. But from the committee's perspective, if someone leaves the program halfway through and it's something that's a GA or a TA position, they lose a teacher that they had originally slotted and they don't get that money back. If someone leaves the program, there's just an empty spot and it's not like they can bring in an additional person instead. So they're looking for people that they're relatively confident are going to completely matriculate. And that also helps their graduation numbers. Like any university, they want to have a high level percentage of people completing the program. So make it easy for them by making it clear that you will go through, you want to do it, and you know what it's going to take to get there.
What other questions do y'all have? Or Ellie, if you want to keep going. Maybe one more?
One more we can do. One thing is we talked a little bit about research and how to articulate that, knowing that it will change. How specific versus broad should you be with your research interests? And is there a sweet spot there?
Yeah, you don't want to be too hyper specific because they probably know the research better than you do in terms of what's out there. Mm-hmm. And we don't want an experience where, Dr. Willett, or at the time, Kristen, you said you wanted to study X, but there's 5 articles about that already. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's unlikely that would happen, but you want to say that you are going to inform a conversation of existing literature by focusing on and then general broad topic you're interested in, and maybe a couple of examples of how you might finesse that over the years.
Yeah. And I would say the easiest way to do this is, how has it evolved over time? So say like you've looked into this topic and you see a lot that's taken place, let's say in 2010s, but nobody's looking future leaning, or something has changed very recently and no one's really understood this change. You're not going to necessarily be to the, no one's going to say, oh, they didn't know this one thing. If you're talking about how you're interested in studying it as it evolves in the future. So let's say when I was in school, the ACA, the Obamacare had just taken place. So one of the things I talked about is I was really interested in understanding how the dialogue around healthcare has changed and evolved with Obamacare. And so, there isn't a whole lot of past research on this. So I couldn't necessarily be tested on everything in the past. And so it also showed that future facing, and it's a high topic area for research. So it was one of those of okay, we're interested in this too. So an easy way to do that, if you're I don't know, would be to say I'm future facing. Another one is if you have an article that you found really fascinating and it's not too old, bringing that one in as well and saying, I've read this, I found it fascinating, I'd like to continue the conversation of this article, is usually pretty helpful too. So you're not broad, but you're saying here's a specific example of something I'm interested in.
And that's a big part of the coursework too, is finding out what is it you are interested in. So yes, one thing to get in the door, but it's all right, you're going to be taking these classes, you're going to be learning new theories. And so it's your ability to communicate what you're interested in now. And again, what Dr. Hahn said is your ability to actually matriculate through the program and your commitment, your passion, all of those things.
Awesome. Well, thank
Great.
you all so
Yeah.
much. I'll give a
And-
quick
Yeah.
GSCO announcement. Before I do, I just want to say that was incredibly detailed and thorough. What we got in an hour was more than I got in hours of Reddit thread searching and talking to different advisors. So this was awesome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This quick update is that we will have some position openings with the GSCO this coming semester. We have a director of comms position, treasurer, secretary, events coordinator, and social media coordinator open to JHU graduate students. In the future, we will be having a meeting about that, so we'll send out more updates as we plan. I think that should be in early May, and we'll have elections soon thereafter. So if that's something you're interested in or know someone who might be interested in this, just send them our way. And this has been great. Thank you all for coming tonight. And unless there are any other updates, I think we're ready to log off. Thank you all.
Yeah, so here's our social media channels. They're all JHU.com. And then if you wanted to contact any of us, you can easily Google our contact information, or our email addresses here as well. And Allie and Thilia, both the co-presidents of the committee, I just can't thank you all enough. It's exciting to see these events happening and just this come to fruition. So I appreciate that. And Belin and Cassandra, and I don't know if John's on or not, but I appreciate the entire GSCO board. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your night.
Bye.
Bye.